When you check out the main slate for Friday in daily fantasy baseball, you're going to see pretty much right away that Clayton Kershaw and Brandon Woodruff are our top two pitchers of the night on FanDuel. And I love both those guys. Look great in their debuts this year, generally very good pitchers as well. But both of them have one key, I would say, major flaw in their profile. And our job is to decide, does that push us off them? How does that alter our ranking of these two guys? And where else do we go if we don't want to go Kershaw and Woodruff? We're going to break down all that, also talk about some top stacks, and give you some brief thoughts on the early-only slate on FanDuel for today. Welcome on into the solo shop. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire, here to break down the main slate over on FanDuel with lock set for 4:40 p.m. Eastern. It is a 6-game main slate. We'll break down that one here first. Later on, though, I also will touch briefly on the early-only slate. I'll do just one pitcher and two stacks in that one very quickly. If you're tuning in closer to 4:10 p.m. Eastern, you want to get some lineups in for that early-only slate, I put the timestamp for when that discussion begins in the episode description on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, et cetera, et cetera. So if you want to jump ahead to that and then come back here for the main slate, feel free to do so. But the lock for that is at 4:10 p.m. Eastern. The early-only slate is a 4-game slate. Weather for the main slate for today, there is a chance of rain later in the day for the Braves and the Padres. I think they should be good to play, but it is worth noting there is some rain potentially in the forecast there. So check back on the timing of that weather to make sure it will not interrupt the Braves and the Padres. We'll dive into the pitching preview on this main slate in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts, NBA, DFS, via Tom Vecchio. For today, the Daily ISO will still be up. I don't believe running during the playoffs, but still one more slate there. We've got PGA every week, USC for Austin Swain for the big slates. There is one this weekend, so find all those on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like what you hear, leave us a 5-star rating. Grand slams, no hitters, and double plays are back. And there's no better place to get in on the MLB action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, new customers can step up to the plate with a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. Sign up, place your first bet, and get up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you don't win. So don't miss your chance to get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. First online real money wager only. $10 deposit required. Refund issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See full terms at FanDuel.com/sportsbook. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG. In Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342. In Connecticut, 1-888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org/chat. In Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Wyoming and Kansas, 1-800-522-4700 or in Kansas, ksgamblinghelp.com. In Louisiana, 1-877-770-STOP. In Maryland, mdgamblinghelp.org. In New York, 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY. And in West Virginia, go to 1-800-GAMBLER.net. Pitching preview for this Friday main slate. Clayton Kershaw comes in with the highest salary on FanDuel. He is $10,800. Brandon Woodruff is at $10,500. We got Jack Flaherty at $9,000, Zach Eflin at $88,000, and Patrick Sandoval at $86,000 as the final guy above $8,000. Now, with Woodruff and Kershaw, the two major malfunctions they have today are different. For Kershaw, it's a repeat matchup. For Woodruff, it's a very difficult matchup. I like Kershaw a bit more, despite the repeat matchup. It is not something I love, as we'll discuss, but I think it does, the overall profile does favor Kershaw by a bit. So let's talk about him first, then we'll dive in to Woodruff later on. I don't like repeat matchups because the opposing team is familiar with what that pitcher is doing. They prepared for him just a week ago. They know what he's throwing. They saw him in person. That's in place here with Kershaw facing Arizona. But Kershaw was very good there. It is a good matchup. So I am going to go back here despite those reservations around that. The Diamondbacks aspect of it is pretty big here because they have just a 95 WRC plus against lefties on the current active roster since the start of last year. Very little power, and Kershaw buzzed through them last week. He had 9 strikeouts in 6 innings of 1-run ball. He induced a 15.8% swing and strike rate, and he needed just 76 pitches to get through 6 innings. I have Kershaw projected to go up to 88 tonight. I had his projection, I think, a bit higher than 76 last week. So he's more stretched out than what he went last week. And 88 may be enough to keep pace with guys like Woodruff. The matchup here, very good. Kershaw has been effective for a pretty long while now. He's been throwing more curveballs for his past 16 starts dating back to last year. And in that time, a 2.87 skill interactive ERA with a 29% strikeout rate. His skill interactive ERA is best on the slate. Very good batted ball data too. So it is suboptimal to have a repeat matchup. I don't like that, but I am still fine with it here. I think it's good enough where Kershaw will be my top guy tonight, edging out Brandon Woodruff in number 2. I think that the reason we can feel good about Kershaw and Woodruff 1-2, despite the fact both have flaws, is they are a tier above everybody else from an effectiveness perspective, which is why I'm okay with Woodruff despite a really tough matchup. He's facing the Cardinals, who have a 120 WRC plus against righties. They have a low strikeout rate as well, and that's a big part of why Kershaw is higher for me. But Woodruff, very, very good pitcher. He's been throwing fewer sinkers his past 14 starts. His ERA is 2.38, so good results. 2.91 skill interactive ERA, good peripherals, 31% strikeout rate. That strikeout rate is the highest on the slate for tonight. The one issue Woodruff has had is fly balls. He's letting up a 42% fly ball rate with a 39% hard hit rate. So that's concerning. The results have been fine, but my worry is that the batted ball concerns may be more apparent in a tough matchup, which is what he has. I've got Woodruff with the highest strikeout projection on the slate at 7.25. Part of that is pitch count because he's at 97, whereas Kershaw is at 88. So I don't mind if you want to go Woodruff, but just know that it is a tougher matchup for him than Kershaw. I think they are a 55-45 kind of split. If you give me 100 lineups, I'd probably go 55 Kershaw, 45 Woodruff. They're both very close. So if you have a lean towards one, I would say go with it because both those guys to me are very, very fun. Now for the third slot and the value slot, I think you could go Patrick Sandoval there, but he's facing the Jays, which is a very tough matchup despite the changes on their roster. So instead, I want to go with the other guy in the 8,000 range, and that's Zach Eflin. And we saw a lot of encouraging stuff with Zach Eflin in his first start with the Rays. And I think it makes him viable here. A big part of it is the matchup because Eflin is at home facing off with the A's with a 92 WRC plus on their active roster since the start of last year. Minimal walks for the A's. That helps keep the pitch count in check, which keeps things more efficient. And that's good for Eflin, who I don't think is fully stretched out as of yet. Eflin in that debut looked way different than what he did last year. He's cut back on his sinker usage, which is always good, instead throwing more curveballs and more cutters, and he's working in his changeup a bit more, and that changeup was really nasty, 83% whiff rate on 9 pitches, according to Baseball Savant. Curveball was good too for Eflin. Spin rate for him was up across the board, and all this led to a 17.3% swinging strike rate. Now, that did come against Detroit, but the A's, not a super stiff matchup either. The one concern you could have with Eflin is pitch count because he went 75 in that start. I haven't projected for 85 for tonight, which means his strikeout projection pretty modest when you compare it to Woodruff and Kershaw. But I think that there is upside in that projection because, again, he did look really good in that first start. He made tangible changes that led to us believing there was an actual change in what he was doing. So the projection could be very wrong, could be underselling Eflin based on what we saw in that first start. So I still like Kershaw and Woodruff more, but I will definitively have Eflin in my player pool tonight based on this matchup, based on what he did in that first start, because I think there was enough there to believe that it could wind up being legit. So to me, Zach Eflin's the top non-Kershaw or Woodruff starter for tonight. As for stacking, if you listened to yesterday's slate, I was high in the Coors Field game, and it was about as low scoring as could possibly be. So that's not ideal. And I can understand if you are wary going back there for today, especially because one of the pitchers in this game is better than either pitcher going yesterday. I do still think that Coors Field is the top 2 stacks of today's slate. I prefer the Rockies, so let's start there. They're facing Mackenzie Gore, and Gore had good results in his first game this year. He went 5 1/3 innings, let up 1 run. That came against the Braves, and the Braves are a very tough team against lefties. And also in that game, Gore's velocity was up from the end of last year. He had good batted ball suppression, and given how talented Mackenzie Gore is, that's very noteworthy. He could have turned a corner because why wouldn't he? He's a good pitcher who had a full offseason to improve as at a young age. But Gore did walk 4 batters there. He's at Coors Field for tonight. So it is entirely possible as he's turned things around, but I just want to see it happen more than once before avoiding him in DFS, especially when it's at Coors Field. So I will be on the Rockies for tonight. I think that it's worthwhile to do so, despite what Gore did, despite what happened at Coors yesterday. But I think it's a good spot to hedge a bit, where you don't go as hard as at Coors Field as you would on a typical slate. Still have it as a top stack, but maybe not as big of a runaway as it typically would be, specifically on the Rockies side, to account for the fact that Gore may be living up to his potential right now. This does seem, though, like a good spot to buy into Chris Bryant, where Bryant basically had a lost year last year, but he hit the ball pretty well in the spring with good power numbers. He has run in the past, 10 stolen bases back in, I think, 2021. Not sure if he'll get back to that this year or not, but it could happen. I really want guys who will run this year in MLB DFS because it's a big boost. He's facing a lefty, so I think it's a good spot to check out Chris Bryant for tonight. But again, just be cautious, I would say, in your Rockies exposure because of the changes Gore has made. Other side of this game is the Nationals, and I would love to not use them here because they're the Nationals. I think their offense stinks. But they're facing Jose Urena, and I feel like that doesn't leave us with much of a choice here. Urena made his first start this year on the road, and really tough start there. 4 walks, no strikeouts, 2 1/3 innings. He let up 4 earned runs, and of the 12 balls in play he allowed, half of them were hard hits. It's the same thing that we saw last year with Urena. He has made 18 starts since he joined the Rockies rotation back in June. His skill interactive ERA is 5.01. He has a 15% strikeout rate, which is the lowest in the slate. And letting up balls in play can be dangerous anywhere. It is especially dangerous at Coors Field. Urena letting up a 40% hard hit rate on those balls in play across this larger sample. And again, it was 50% in the game last week. So in an ideal world, I'd love to not stack the Nationals here. I think that'd be great. I just don't think I can do that with the pitcher being Urena. So the Nationals, I think we kind of have to go there, despite the fact we may not really want to. Now, lefties did hit Urena a lot harder than righties last year. So that's a good thing here to keep in mind when stacking the Nationals. Plenty of lefties here, a lot of switch hitters. Kaiber Ruiz, one of those switch hitters. He had 4 steals versus righties last year, so he's a catcher who will run. He had a 38% fly ball rate, minimal strikeouts. Didn't hit for a lot of power this spring, but he's been fine to open this year. So Ruiz is a guy I'll be high on, assuming he does play. Again, with catchers, always kind of risky. But with Kaiber Ruiz, I think that if he does wind up being in there, he'll be a guy I'm high on for daily fantasy for today. For this third spot for stacking, there are a lot of contenders. And again, no things to watch for today because talking about the early only slate later on. I will list off the other considerations, though. Should you dislike Coors or should you dislike the third stack? Other contenders I would consider here for stacking. I like the Angels. Chris Bassitt's really struggled since the start of spring. His velocity was way down his first start. That puts the Angels in play. The Padres facing Jared Schuster. It's at decent weather in Atlanta. I don't mind that. Nick Martinez could struggle against the Braves. So Braves, Padres, Angels, and then the Rays. The Rays facing Ken Waldichuk. I think all of those teams are in play, which means you have alternatives. If you don't like Coors Field, cool. You can go elsewhere. That's totally fine. But you got a lot of alternatives. I do still like Coors most, but if you want to go, again, Angels, Padres, Braves, Rays, other alternatives. My top alternative, though, is going to be the Dodgers. I have a hard time not putting them third against Madison Bumgarner. And the big appeal here is the hard contact Bumgarner has been allowing. Mad Bum has reduced his cutter usage over his past 16 starts. And in that time, he's letting up a 40% hard hit rate with a 42% fly ball rate. We saw that bite him in the butt last week against the Dodgers, the same offense. 5 earned runs in 4 innings. And his velocity in that game was also down from where it was last year. It wasn't like a concerning amount, but like it was down. Could have been because it was cold in LA. Temperature does impact velocity, so maybe not a huge concern yet, but it was down. I think that is at least somewhat noteworthy. In that game, the Dodgers, couple barrels against him, 5.9% swinging strike rate. That's down from 7.4% in the other games with fewer cutters towards the end of last year. And again, the Dodgers just saw him last week. If I'm going to be concerned about Kershaw in this spot, I should probably be concerned about Bumgarner as well. So I do think the Dodgers are number 3, but again, a lot of good options to consider here as far as other stacks on the main slate. Within the Dodger stacks, there are a couple guys here who get pretty sizable boosts against lefties. JD Martinez, I don't tend to use against righties ever at this point in his career. Just don't see the appeal. A lot of other guys in this lineup I'd rather use, but Martinez has a 270 ISO versus lefties since the start of last year. That's playable, so I can use that. Trace Thompson, just more likely to play against a lefty, which gives him a boost, obviously. Does strike out a bunch, but really good power numbers, both against righties and lefties, but should bat 6th or 7th somewhere in there for tonight, and that could be high enough for Thompson to be viable. And then also Miguel Vargas hit lefties really well in AAA last year. He's missed the past couple of games, so not sure if he'll play, but if Vargas is in there, his salary is $2,500, and I am very into that as a way to save some salary and make it easier to get to both Kershaw and Woodruff for tonight. Do you want to do some dinger picks here for the main slate only? I'll talk about some for the early only slate too, because why not? But the boring one and the fun one kind of blend together because neither of them is like super, super, super boring. But we're going to go with Keibert Ruiz and Isaac Paredes. Ruiz at Coors Field, so pretty boring there, but facing guy lets up a lot of hard contact and fly balls. Ruiz, I think, has power. If not, he can steal some bases for us. So good DFS play regardless. So Keibert Ruiz, one of them. Isaac Paredes didn't go yard for us a couple days ago when the Rays were very kind to us, but I'm back on once again for today. So Paredes and Ruiz are the 2 home run calls for the main slate. If you're listening after 10 p.m. Eastern, feel free to go on about your way. We'll talk to you once again Monday. But let's talk a bit now about this early only slate, which locks at 4:10 p.m. Eastern. It is a 4-game slate. Pretty limited. No big weather concerns for today on this early only slate. So it should be good to go. Also, temperatures pretty truncated. There's not a huge gap between the highest temperatures and the lowest temperatures. My favorite pitcher on the early only slate is going to be Lucas Giolito. I am willing to check out Aaron Savali, Logan Gilbert, Alex Cobb. But Cobb and Savali have pitch count issues, and Savali and Gilbert are both facing the same teams they faced last week. And as discussed with Kershaw, not a big fan of that. Giolito was a guy I was very off of last year, but he looked okay against the Astros. He now gets the Pirates, who have a 24% strikeout rate against righties. So I will go to Giolito tonight. But again, the other guys are at least worth considering here. So Giolito would be my favorite pitcher on the early only slate. The 2 favorite stacks for me on the early only slate are the White Sox and the Giants. White Sox are facing Rich Hill, which means they get a lefty, which is always good for them. Maybe not as much as in the past with Jose Abreu gone, but like still a good thing for them to face a lefty. We did see Hill get some strikeouts in his first start, but not many whiffs, let up a lot of barrels, a lot of hard contact in that game. So I think the White Sox can handle him. The White Sox and Giolito, both to me, good options for this slate. The Giants, other stack I like, facing Brad Keller, who I don't mind. I think he's okay, get some ground balls, but does let up a lot of hard contact. San Francisco, not as much of a pitcher's park this time of year due to cold weather elsewhere. The reason that San Francisco stinks generally is because it's so much colder than everywhere else, but that's not the case on this slate. In fact, it's a bit warmer than a couple spots. So it's not as big of a pitcher's park as it otherwise would be relative to other parks. So San Francisco, the Giants, I think that they are in play. I also don't mind the Twins against Jose Urquidy, but I will go with the Giants above them. Dinger calls for the early only slate again, just for fun, because it's a small slate, but Yoel Moncada actually hit for a little bit of power against lefties last year and has looked really good to open this year. So we'll go with Moncada against Rich Hill. And then talking about the Twins against Urquidy, who lets up a lot of fly balls, Trevor Larnach, hitting the middle part of that order, has shown power in the past. I'm willing to ride at that. So dinger calls for the early only slate, Yoel Moncada and Trevor Larnach. that is all that we have here for today on the Solo Shot and across this entire week. But do want to thank you all for tuning in for today. We are back once again next week with a full week of the Solo Shot. So make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. If you have any questions for me, if you need substitute dinger calls, if one of my guys isn't in the lineup, or you have questions about terminology, MLB DFS in general, hit me up on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JimSannes. And you can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Want to thank you all for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your lineups for MLB DFS for today. Have a fantastic and safe holiday weekend for all of you out there celebrating holidays. And we'll talk to you once again on Monday. This has been the Solo Shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.